This was sent in the CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Steve Van Etten. I recently watched a Clash from 1989 in Fort Bragg, and I couldn't help but notice that Bobby looked a little fleshier than normal. Did Jim ever have to address one of his charges' weight? If it was becoming an issue, and if so, how awkward were those conversations? Incidentally, that show also featured the debut of Jimmy Garvin as a Freebird, as well as the Ding Dongs and Ranger Ross battling the terrorist. Gotta love Jim Herd. And the reason I brought up the Heat before, Jim, because I think that may be the hottest wrestling show I've ever seen on TV, where it just looked like everyone was sweating their ass off.
The walls were actually dripping. The walls of here was the deal. And first of all, no, I never. Bobby had gotten a little fleshy there for a couple of reasons. Number one, that's the right after the period where we had taken for the first time in, what was it? That was 1989. So for the first, well, for in Bobby's case, he had had the better part of 2 months off the wrestling business for the first time in 12 years. Because we had taken time off from WCW when George Scott was booking, and then we had come back, and that was one of our first shows back. And also he had had the knee issue, which is one of the reasons why we were happy to have the time off. And he had gotten a little fleshy anyway. And also there was a motivational factor at some points in WCW, but he ended up going on his own diet and dropping some weight down because it made his knees feel better. And once he got started working again, obviously some of it came off anyway. So no, Bobby at one point in the WCW years did get a little fleshy, but he was still doing everything he always did. It was harder on his body. So, but as far as the Clash being hot, it was at the Army base at Fort Bragg, right? Or was it I guess it's the Army.
I think so.
Or is it the Marines?
Maybe the Marines.
It ain't the Navy. I don't know. It's Fort Bragg. And the deal was it was like a field house, and it was not air conditioned at all. And they're doing national TV from there on TBS with those hot lights, and the admission was free to everybody on the base. So the place was jam fucking packed, which is what they wanted. And they couldn't draw a house like that, any other way in those days. But as a result, it was literally like 125, 130 degrees in the building. I mean, it was fucking, and this is how hot it was that I could believably do this. Well, first, that was the night, I think on our first match, I'm doing the introduction. We're baby faces, remember, right? At that point in time, we have come back as baby faces. I'm doing the introduction to the Midnight Express for the match with the Freebirds, and a drunk fucking soldier jumps up and tries to jump into the ring, but he fucking hung himself on the top rope and flipped over and just landed in a fucking heap.
That's right.
And the other soldiers came and grabbed him, and I said, yeah, sleep it off, you fucking drunk. I switched heel again, or whatever the fuck. But anyway, everybody laughed at him. Then the Midnight's wrestling the Freebirds. It's the World Tag Team Title Tournament, either semifinals or finals, whatever. And that's when Paul E. came out and hit me with his own loaded tennis racket that he knocks me out. Somewhere or another, the Freebirds win the match. And then they open the cover and reveal that his racket was really loaded. And mine was never revealed, but his was opened and revealed it had chains and all this other stuff in it. And to sell the thing, they had the EMTs at the building, the Army EMTs or whatever, because I've been knocked out, and they have them go carry me out, right? Well, they carry me all the way out the back door, and my God, it was the middle of summer, and it was like 30 degrees cooler outside. It was only like 90. So as they take me out and they lay me there, now I'm selling, and I thought they were going to take me to the locker room, but instead they're treating me like I've legitimately been knocked out. They're doing the fucking, let me see your eyes and shining the light, and they're taking my blood pressure, and they're doing all this shit. And so I've got to go with this. So I'm saying everything got black, and it was so hot. I saw the sparkly things, and they wanted to transport me to the fucking hospital. And at that point, I give, who was it? One of the referees, maybe Pee Wee was there, but I give somebody the fucking Iggy, the office on the wrist, right? Get me out of here. And they said, look, let's take him back to where he can change out of these hot clothes and then we'll evaluate. And they got me back to the locker room, but they were going to take me to the fucking hospital because I was selling being knocked out by a loaded tennis racket. But it was so hot, it was believable, you know, because I was already fucking blowed up to begin with.
So that was your first night back.
No, the first night was at Center Stage, I remember. And then we got in the tag team title tournament, and that was the first clash back. It was like the same week or whatever.
Whatever optimism you may have had during that time off, where you're just working Continental and eating food, was it met when you got back, or did you instantly think, oh boy, there's still going to be a problem with this company, even with the change in management?
Well, no, we didn't have any optimism at that point anyway, because we had already had the discussions with Jim Herd over our contracts and saw where the fuck he was at. And then I was looking at, you know, I mean, still, Ranger Ross, there was a reason to experiment with Ranger Ross because he was a legitimate service veteran. He'd been, somebody said he was a parachute jumper. What do they call the aerial parachute people in the service? Whatever. He did that in the war in Grenada, right? But somebody on the fucking wrestling show said, yeah, they dropped him into Grenada dropped him out of a plane into Grenada or something. Anyway, he was a good looking guy and he was a good athlete and he had wrestled locally, but he wasn't getting over. He was just too nice and bland. And they had him against Ranger Ross versus the terrorist at Fort Bragg, so he'd get a pop, right? But the ding-dongs and Herd's sticking this other shit in. And so we didn't really have any optimism coming back, except that we figured, well, in this fucking field, it won't be hard to get over again. And we're already over to begin with, and they've had a break from us. How can we miss you if you won't go away? But what we didn't realize was the lengths and the depths of which Herd would go to bury us. The time I got optimistic was when Flair said fuck it after the July bash, the 89 bash, and said, I want to be the head booker instead of this committee, and I want to determine the direction. And that's when I got optimistic. And then he asked me to be on the committee, and working with him and Kevin and seeing the ratings go up and the numbers go up. We couldn't do anything about the house shows because we couldn't go out and poster each one of them individually. But the TV ratings, pay-per-views went up. The match quality went up. The talent quality that was being used went up. He wanted to push Pillman. He wanted to push the Steiners. He wanted, you know, I got optimistic there and was, even though I was seeing Herd every fucking week at that point, which kept me from really being optimistic, the product was better and the numbers were better. But then when he quit, that's when in February, I pretty much gave up and zoned out for the rest of the year. I just worried about our shit and I didn't care what the fuck they did.
It's interesting. On the most recent episode of John Arezzi's Pro Wrestling Spotlight Then and Now, another fine show on the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network, June 4th, 1989.
Trademark.
Yeah, that's right. June 4th, 89. And there are two callers. It makes me think of this. One of them was saying how, you know, we all love the NWA right now, but the diehards can't sustain a wrestling company. You need a mainstream audience. And another caller called up and said, look, I love the NWA, but they're starting to copy the WWF too much. They're starting to take little things from the WWF. And he starts mentioning like little skits with doctors and different things. And it's just interesting because, you know, looking back, so many people look at 1989 literally as the glory days. Not just the name of the Great American Bash pay-per-view, but they see the summer of 89 into the fall of 89. I guess really up until February of 90, like right around there is the cutoff.
Imagine that.
So knowing that that period of time is held in such high regard, what do you think of that? Do you understand it? Do you see it the same way? Are you overly critical of it because you were both involved as talent and then later as part of, dare I say, management on the booking committee? What do you think when you look at, let's say, from May of 89 until February of 90. So before you were on the committee and then your time on the committee.
Well, yeah, no, what both those people said was correct because you can't sustain, which is what I'm telling all elite wrestling, you can't sustain a company with just the diehards. And unfortunately, over the previous 6 to 9 months, really, that's all. After that, that's all that they had left in the summer of 89 was the diehard WCW fans that were hoping it was going to get better. But I mean, look at I just did an article on the Great American Bash for the dearly departed Fighting Spirit magazine, folks. They're going to be collector's items because the last issue is coming out next month. But the 86 Great American Bash in Greensboro did fucking 15,000 people. In 87, pretty much the same. In 88, I think it was maybe in 12,000. In 89, 1,500. Charlotte. Amazing. In 85, 27,000. In 86, 23,000. In 87, 15,000 because they were starting to do bashes in all the towns in North Carolina. So, of course, it was going to go down somewhat. But the Charlotte bash in 89, it did fucking less than 3,000. All the house shows had fallen in a hole because of the rotten TV tapings in major markets. They disrupted the schedule. They got new people booking the events and the buildings on the wrong days and the wrong towns. The syndicated TV, just everything fell apart very quickly. So, yes, I agree. You know, that's all they had left was the diehards, but they also... What got the numbers back up the second half of the year was Flair relying on good quality talent and angles that people could get into and trying to eliminate the fucking ding-dong bullshit and the fucking, goofy WWE light bullshit that Herd wanted to do. Well, to get the kids. Remember, he's the one that wanted to, if they could find a one-legged wrestler, they could have Long John Silver because they owned the rights to the fucking movie Treasure Island. Yeah. But the pay-per-views came up. The TV ratings were the best TBS ratings from the time they bought the company until 1995 or 6 under Flair. And so people remember that fondly because they remember that they watched the TV shows and they've got the pay-per-views now on the network. They don't realize that actually business-wise, the only year worse than 1989 for business in WCW was 1990. And the only year worse than 1990 was 91. By 92, they weren't even fucking running house shows a lot. And Smoky Mountain Wrestling in 1994, we ran the Cobb Civic Center in Marietta and drew a bigger crowd than WCW often had running the Omni till they quit running it. It just, they never got a chance to get started because all Herd wanted to do was copy Vince because he figured, well, since I don't know anything about wrestling, this guy's a success, so I'm going to copy this. He didn't understand that the reason why WCW had a loyal, diehard audience, many of whom had been driven away, is because it was the exact opposite of the cartoon bullshit WWF. We had blood and violence and realism and fights and shit that Dusty did that made people fucking want to choke somebody. But it worked because it was all about fucking everything. You know, everything is fucking life and death. And the NWA fans like that. WCW washed all the fucking grease and grime off of it. And it was just bullshit.
This period of time is 30 years ago, and I guess probably for that reason, it's been covered on a few of my shows. John McAdams' show, Stick to Wrestling, just did a segment where he talked about being in the bathroom, I believe at the hotel, after an NWA show, or after a WWF show in Boston, and a few wrestlers, and I won't say who, but I know who, came up to him, right behind him, and said, "What do you know about Dusty coming here?" You know, so I mean, they were thinking about that. And on John Arezzi's show, we're listening to, again, June 4th, 89 right now is what we're up to this week. And there's a lot of callers saying this is right when Dusty went in and Wyndham went in too. And the rumors everyone was saying was this opens the door for Mike Rotunda to return to the WWF. And this is right when the Varsity Club broke up, even though he was a heel for a little while longer. Was that a rumor in the locker room in the NWA that Mike Rotunda would jump to the WWF when Wyndham and Dusty showed up there?
No, because he was under contract. So he couldn't have if he wanted to unless he'd asked. But see, that's what people, you know, and I guarantee you a bunch of people were shitting in the WWF, Dusty coming here, because the best thing they could have done, they could have counter-programmed and won that thing a whole lot quicker since WCW had become the, fucking land of herd and the ding-dongs and the hunchbacks, despite everything that Flair and everybody else could do, and that's why Flair quit, because Herd wouldn't leave him alone. They should have given Dusty the book, and they should have started doing fucking juice and bull rope in the WWF. They would have flipped the fucking thing and won. They would have kicked WCW's ass in 6 months. That's what they should have done.
I think the quote was, "We came here to get away from him."
Well, anybody that ever went anywhere to get away from Dusty Rhodes couldn't fucking hang and didn't know how to draw money.
Wow. All right.
Because everybody that stuck with Dusty Rhodes drew nothing but money and made nothing but money.